All right, guys, it's 7:01. We need to get started. All right, first item up for discussion tonight is the Meeting Policy and Procedures Draft Municipal Order. Councilwoman Rebecca Reckers, Councilman Tyson Hermes, and Attorney Jack Gatlin. Who's taken the lead on this guy?
Councilwoman. So in everyone's email is a copy of the revised municipal order for rules and procedures of meetings. There's just been a carved out section to change ad hoc committees to include task forces. Everything that has been changed has been struck through, and anything been added has been underlined. And that just includes requiring a mission statement or clear-cut directive for each ad hoc committee, task force, something that's to the benefit of staff, residents, or businesses. Regular council or fairly regular meetings, a commitment there with the amount of people that we would like to see in attendance, and that includes any combination of staff, council members, or residents, because they're, of course, welcome to attend. And a timeline to meet that goal or abolish the committee once that goal has been met. To have its scheduled meetings with the clerk to avoid overlapping, and then all meetings ideally would be in the small council chambers. And lastly, within 5 calendar days of a committee meeting, ad hoc committee task force meeting, having your unapproved minutes provided to the city clerk so that she can distribute. Do you guys have any questions, changes, recommendations? Diana?
If I heard you correctly, you wanted all the meetings to be in the small chambers here in council. Is that where you wanted them to be?
Yes, and the reason for that is to avoid overlap. There have been a few instances where 2 task forces have inadvertently been booked at the same time, and that makes it challenging for multiple council members who want to be involved in both tasks to attend, but also it could conflict residents who want to participate as well, and having them in small chambers makes it very easily accessible to the public.
I think that it's best to have, if we're at Public Works, have it at the Public Works facility, the fire department at the fire department, and so on. And then we always give public notice, and then there is the city calendar that would have everybody's meetings that anybody can look at. So I don't agree with having them all here at the city building. It's just my opinion.
Yeah, that was going to be the only thing, if we could change the shall to a should in that item C. I mean, I agree it's ideal for them to all be over here. I just didn't want to be restricted if we needed to or wanted to meet somewhere else, having to wait for a council meeting to. But I do like the idea of them all being in the same spot whenever possible.
So, Mr. Gatlin, if we could change the second, it's E. Subsection E. The first, it said should be scheduled to not overlap, and then the second mention would be shall to should. Thank you. Any other questions? Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and put that on as legislation for the March council meeting. All right. Next item on the agenda is City Parks Fiscal Year 2022 Budget Amendment. Director Peter Glenn.
Okay, thank you, Mayor, Council. Okay, what I put before you a few minutes ago is kind of summary of the 2021-22 budget amendment request for our Parks Capital account. So I'm just going to briefly kind of walk you through kind of what we've done and how we got where we're at and what we're requesting. So, so basically, last budget year, we had $250,000 allocated for Parks Capital. And what we did is we bid out Silver Lake Phase 1, and engineering and the capital parks project totaled $242,500. So we were within budget, and we proceeded on. With COVID last year, some delivery on some key items was greatly affected, one being the basketball goals. And what happened is they were delayed, and then when they were finally manufactured, they had some major cracking. They're concrete, so they had some major cracking involved, and they all had to be recast and redone and put us back terribly. And they were actually delivered after the budget year. And what that hampered was us moving forward with the basketball court. So everything was demoed, and all the road was taken as far as it could be taken until the basketball goals were installed. Then the courts were overlaid with asphalt, and then the roads were overlaid with asphalt, and then the basketball courts were painted. And all those were big ticket items dollar-wise, so that really put a lot of costs to roll over into this current budget year. So on the second sheet, you kind of see some rollover cost, and whereas that Silver Lake project was $242,000, $152,000 of that rolled over into this budget year. Okay, so how did it affect this budget year? So what happened this budget year is we have $1.25 million, and you can see all the projects that we've accomplished or trying to accomplish between the Silver Lake Phase 2 improvements, which is $473,000. Engineering on top of that, it was another $47,300. The restroom project, which is bid and under contract at $437,000. The flagship play surface at $220,000, engineering for that, and then our park master plans, which was the Depot, Locust, and Stetter parks. All told, all the projects that we did this year are within the allocated $1.25 million, but with the carryover from last year, it puts us over budget for this year. So right now we have an outstanding bid for the Silver Lake Phase 2 that we're having trouble. We can't sign contracts for because we're underfunded. And we tried to do all we can on that project to get the cost to a minimum as much as possible. We eliminated a lot of things trying to get the cost down, but we're still at $473,000, and that's pretty much bare bones for that phase. So basically, we have on the following page, talks about the budget amendment. So basically, we have a difference in our budget needs of $121,000 to move forward, and what we're asking for is $150,000. $28,000 would just be for contingencies as we move forward with the work down at Silver Lake Park, which is, for change orders or anything like that. Not that we're anticipating any, but, we're kind of worried about some of the fill and things like that might be problematic, could be problematic. So we just want a little bit of a cushion there in case change orders come up. It wouldn't force us to be over budget again. So with that being said, what we're...
Go ahead.
Yeah,
No, go finish
I'll
first.
finish and then you...
I
I just got one more thing to say real quick. So the $150,000 that we, that we left behind in last year's budget, we're not asking for that to be brought forward into this budget year. We have some available funding in our street capital account that can be transferred over. We have bid out all of our street capital projects for this budget year, and we have added an additional street. So we've actually done more than what we kind of had scheduled, and we have, right now we have available funding enough that we can take from that and bring it over into the parks. And we didn't really have plans, nor did we have time to budget or design and construct another street project this year. Yeah.
Thanks, Mr. Glenn. And I think, Mayor and Mr. Kramer, thanks as well for the revised memo. I had a lot of heartburn over the weekend when I saw the first one. I'm like, man, we're asking for another $158,000 is the way that I read the first memo at first.
Yeah.
When we've got, the things that we need to really be thinking about. But as I understand it now, and it's been explained to me, this is more of an accounting piece because we did work that we started last year that
Yeah.
council did approve. And
Yeah.
so I understand that. And we're asking for less than what it would have been had we done the actual work
That
last
is
year,
correct.
so.
It's kind of hard to kind of always convey that in written text, I will say from my standpoint. But, so I may not, convey that clearly all the time. But yeah, so we were well within budget last year. We did not go over. We're well within budget this year, what you all allocated for parks this year and last year. So we're within what the parameters were. We're just accounting issues because we can't carry that money forward from last year, even though the project didn't
Understood.
get done in time.
And I just had another question. I know I harp about roads quite a bit.
Yeah.
Can you help me understand, with us, with the $158,000 that was allocated for roads, let's say, where we're at right now, is it even feasible, like if we said, hey, we wanted to, we'll make a budget amendment to give extra money, but still use that $158,000 that was allocated towards roads, is it even feasible to get a project bid and done this year?
It'd be tough because, we're sitting in mid-February right now, and by the time we get with VOX, they get out, do any kind of surveying work, and then start their design. That even on a quicker type of project, that's going to take a little bit of time, and then the bidding portion of it is going to take several weeks, open bids and get in the contract. So we would easily be into April before we ever even sign contracts, and
Okay.
just given a couple months to do a project would kind of. Everything's doable, but I would say it's very unlikely that we could get done by the end of the year.
So then we could potentially, if we wanted to go that route, we could potentially be in the same situation where the work doesn't get done until July 15th, and we've got to do another
Yeah, and then
budget
now,
issue.
now we're fighting the
Okay.
same battle in the street side of it next budget year.
Okay.
And we try to, have good estimates and, and really think out our street projects, but as the bids come in, things are so different, you try to, give your best guesstimate of how the bidding climate's going to be. And, and typically we have a good buffer and, on our street side of it. And that enabled us to pull a street up and, and do Zeta Court that was not originally in this budget year planned. But then it's not only being able to complete a street, it's finding that street that perfectly fits within that budget amount and so on and so forth. And I will say that, we've done a lot of planning, kind of while we're talking about streets. And I know you have a lot of concern as far as how far is our dollars going and what are we doing. We had, since our last budget presentation, we've kind of been revamping our approach and our philosophy with streets, and we've been able to move our streets from seven streets next year to 15. And then the same thing for the following year. So we got a good, solid 3-year plan, which I can't talk too much because I haven't showed Matt yet, but I'm talking out of school. But it's good news, so I don't think but yeah, so we've actually been able to more than double what we're going to be doing over the next 3 years than what we previously planned and how we went about things, which I think was really what we needed to do. Because I've always said that, the dollar amount we spend on streets is really a good number. For a city this size and what we do, it's good money, and we should be able to make that money be enough. And, so we just had to kind of check our approach a little bit, and I think we're now in line with, getting back on course and staying on course. I hope that makes sense. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
I'm just going to ask you a question about the second page. Have some of these projects already been finished? Is that correct, on the second page, where it says?
Yes.
Like the flagship place surface?
Yeah, so so that has been finished. We're holding retainage right now because we have a couple things that we have to iron out with the contractor. Some people got out and put some footprints in there that they're going to come back and fix. The restrooms, we're under contract right now and moving forward. So everything here is, the park master plans pretty much all been finished. And so the only thing that's outstanding is the Silver Lake Phase 2. And we
Okay.
opened bids on that a week and a half ago.
And on the basketball courts, are they responsible for coming back and fixing whatever? Because I thought they did something.
Yeah, yes. So we're holding retainage there as well. So, yeah, when
Okay.
they painted the basketball courts, they mismeasured where the
Yeah,
foul
that's
line
what
is
it
going to
was.
be. And they have come back and actually painted it and fixed it, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not, let's just say, to our standard. So they're going to come back and have to sand down the old painting so that way we don't have any reflective old lines shining through.
And then the Silver Lake restroom, I thought the last time that came up, it was 250,000. Now I'm seeing 437. Is that right, or am I,
Well,
it was never that? Okay, because I thought the last time it brought up, people were really mad because they said, oh, it's too expensive for a bathroom, and,
it was 650.
oh, okay, duh. Okay, well, that makes sense then. Okay, that's what, yeah, all right. But I was confused because I thought a couple of these things had already been done, and they look really nice. Now, what about Rainbow, the Cahill
Cahill Commons,
Park?
yes, ma'am.
Yes. Is that in this year's budget? Because we were going to do the dedication when that was upgraded? believe.
Absolutely, yes. So that's
Okay.
first on our list for next budget year.
Okay, yeah, that's right, because we start in June. All right, thank you. That answers my questions, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Okay, Depot Museum projects, bids, and budget. Councilman Gary Meyer, if you wouldn't mind, I want to talk first. Is that okay? I'm going to come down and talk where I can see you all. I have a really hard time seeing you guys from up there, and I want to be able to look at you. Okay, Depot Museum. This is not a phenomenal conversation that we're going to have, because the bids have come in, and the bids are far exceeding what was allocated. Okay, we put in the budget $67,000 for the depot improvements. The depot improvements came in over $150,000. So $83,000 more than what we had budgeted for. Now, there's good that comes from that because now we understand the scope of work that's necessary to do things right. So there's ADA compliance issues. We have to create a new bathroom that is on the same level as the community space. Therefore, it's a tremendous amount of work with a lot of costs associated with it. We also have to build a ramp around the back of the building to make sure that each entrance is ADA compliant. And there's a tremendous amount of other issues associated with this building. So much that has not been done for so long. And unfortunately, it's in our hands. So, I was originally coming here tonight to ask you for a budget amendment for an additional $83,000. However, I just don't think that's fiscally responsible. So, I am asking that we take a time out, we reevaluate this process, potentially break it down into phases, and phase it out kind of like we're doing the other parks, and not do the $150,000 chunk all at one time. Because to be honest, the $150,000 chunk was pretty much bare minimum. So the possibility of those costs increasing, just like all costs are increasing, it's a reality. And I want to be completely transparent. So is this the conversation I wanted to have tonight? Nope. But it is what it is. So if we want to do it right, it's going to be over $150,000. So it's kind of up to council. Do you want to not do it, phase it out, or just do it? We have our suggestions from this administration, and that's looking at it in next budget. But I want to talk to you guys about it. What do you think? What are the priorities of this council? And how do you want us to move forward? I'm taking suggestions, and I've heard from Gary, and I appreciate, Gary, you're so amazing because you really do challenge us to think of things in a different way, and I appreciate that so much. So, Gary, do you want to talk a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I have, questions, and I think a couple of them I was bringing up right before. I think as I'm thinking about it from like that bigger picture, what do we want that facility to be? Because as I understand, learning more than I really wanted to this week, we shouldn't have opened it to the public. We inappropriately did so without doing all of this work. So we can't just flip the switch and open as it was. Now we can open and, as I understand, and shut some things down, right? Like no public restroom, which I'm not sure is, a great option. I mean, it could be if we still wanted to have that, just the museum part open, but if you go to the museum, you can't go to the bathroom because it's not meeting those requirements. So I think at least what I want to, have additional discussion on, maybe it's not today, but I think we need to do it, is what is this council, what is the city envision for that building? I mean, some of the questions that I had about it, I know we've got the historical marker that's there, that's mounted onto the building, that's in the historical marker registry database. I was curious about, just the facility itself. I don't believe that it's on the National Register of Historic Buildings. If it is, then does that bring additional responsibilities and requirements for us to do stuff? So I think if we, collectively decided what we want the vision to be for that, then that would kind of dictate, okay, what kind of investments do we need to make in the physical structure of the building? I mean, it is a neat thing. The caboose is neat. I love that it was restored, and there was, a lot of things done there. And I do think it is, a challenge right now to say, okay, in the next, several months, let's spend that extra, bunch of money when we haven't necessarily, budgeted and aligned it with other priorities. I know we've got, potential large adjustments that we might need to make in salaries and things like that. So that's where, I was kind of struggling with it at first, from the spending. Do we spend now? My answer is typically no. Let's, and now that I understand a little bit more about it, I want to understand what our vision is for the property. And if we decide, yes, we agree with that vision, then we have to make the appropriate investments in the property. So
I wanted to follow up. You're right. We should not have had that building open. It should have not been for public use because it was not ADA compliant. There were significant issues. And the moment they were called to the attention, we had to take action. So we had to do what we had to do. It's not easy. Ms. Jasper Lucas?
Thank you. Excuse me. I have a few questions and a few comments. Where did the $67,000 estimate come from? Because when that was discussed last year during our budget meeting, based on the plans that I had seen and heard about, I thought that seemed very low at the time. Now, I realize that cost of materials and construction have obviously increased in the past year. So I guess I just make that comment or ask that question, not necessarily for an answer, but just that we can't just pull numbers out of the air and hope that it's enough. So that's more of just a comment for future planning.
Before you let's take a time out and answer that. we want to talk about how we came up with the original, because we do an analysis to understand, what are we anticipating as the costs, just like any of the Parks Master Planning. A lot of those dollar amounts that are built into anticipated costs, they're not put out to bid yet. So they are truly just an estimated guess on what it's going to be and not what the market is actually going to call it to cost.
I also realize that this project is unique in comparison to other parks projects that we do. It's a really old building that we're technically trying to preserve. So it's not your typical project. And I'm not saying that, we don't analyze these things. I'm just saying for this type of project, I wouldn't, if going forward, however we decide to do it, I just want to, try to be a little, as realistic as possible, I guess, in light of what the project actually is.
And I think there's not a tremendous amount of contractors that are interested in this type of project. I mean, we only received 2 bids, and they weren't very competitive. So it's a very difficult. You're totally right. It is a unique project, and not a lot of people are going to be interested in that sort of project.
But you're absolutely right. It isn't really what we do typically, so when we have a project come up like that, we try to do what we can do to kind of help solidify good bids. So we went out, we had the time to go out, we got painting contractors to give us pricing, window tinting people, grading people, and then we kind of looked into lifts, handicap accessible interior lifts, and kind of ballpark that price and kind of put it together. In hindsight, it was extremely low, and probably makes me look bad as far as being when you're less than half, that's pretty bad. But the scope changed is really what really got us. I mean, I think if we even would have in the climate, the bidding climate, of course, is pretty unique now as well. But we were hoping to do an interior lift and to be able to get people in and up, and then when that, we literally could not figure out how to make that happen. The space necessary is way beyond what I thought would be required. Valid, but just something that's not my expertise. So when we figured, try to do that, we looked at doing something outside. We looked at maybe putting in a ramp inside, and then the amount of space that would take up. And it ended up being pretty much our only option was to do a restroom, and it had to be elevated. So we added a whole nother restroom to the scope, making it elevated. Then we had electrical panel. It's in where electrical panels are, and they had to be addressed. So the scope really changed on us, and and this happens so many times when you do a project and things change, and then and now we, like you said, we know a lot more. We have a good baseline for moving forward. So we're not, I'm not so ignorant as I was, 8 months ago.
And I didn't mean anything against you,
I
Peter,
know you
at all.
don't. I know you don't. I'm just saying, but it does fall with me.
My other comment, and this isn't necessarily a finger-pointing thing, but we need to recognize that this has always been in our lap. This is not a new thing that just all of a sudden became Erlanger's building. It's always been ours, and it's been neglected. Amen. And it's a noble project, and it needs to be preserved, but we really do have to consider at what cost. And are we going to take money from other things that are also noble projects and noble needs of our city? And I would personally support a phased-in approach, just because I don't like spending a lot of money on things if other things need to be more of a priority. So I'm reluctant to agree to a budget amendment for this year, and I would be more likely to support something, a phased-in approach for next budget year. That's just my 2 cents.
I completely agree with you. You are right. There's a lot of issues with that building that have been there for a long time, even going back to probably the original renovation. So we're having to undo and repair a lot of issues from the past. Ms. Reckers?
Yeah, I'll echo pretty much seems like everyone's sentiment tonight. I do think that we need to press pause at this time, but with regard to, once we've defined what the true scope of the project is, I'd like to do a side-by-side to what a phased-in approach versus an all-in approach would look like, because we just don't know where the material costs, et cetera, are going to go in the next 6 to 12 months. And I think that we should just evaluate those numbers during the budget process, which is right around the corner. So I appreciate the consideration with putting this on pause for now, just to reevaluate. I think it's going to be the most fiscally responsible decision. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with you. The kicker is, do the prices keep going up? And that's the battle back and forth. Ms. Nicely?
I'm just here thinking outside the box, and it is a unique situation to try to save the depot. Have we thought about it, trying to reach out to get corporate donations? Then we can possibly raise the money and do it all at once? Has that been a consideration to try to do?
I mean, a capital campaign is always a possibility. It would need somebody to champion it. It would need somebody to lead it, because it does require a tremendous amount of effort to make, $150,000 appear, if that is the goal. The other option is looking in grants. I know that that's been a thing of the past, and it's been unsuccessful. However, we've never had this amazing of a grant writing team in the city of Erlanger as we do right now. So that is also another possibility. But I think it's time to start thinking, we already think outside of the box, but now we're throwing the box out the window. So.
And one more thing, since we already had budgeted 67,000? So that can stay benchmark for that, right? So we just need to raise $83,000 to go out to ask for corporate donations, is that correct?
That
Or-
67,000 is only in this fiscal year's budget. So next budget, we would have to allocate that same 67,000 or whatever dollar amount for the project.
Can we allocate that for next budget, since it was already in, roll it over? And then I'll be willing to try to form a committee and work with maybe whoever's doing the grants and see if we could get other people on the committee to reach out to corporate donations instead of trying to get a budget amendment. I just don't feel good about spending that kind of money right now when there's other things probably needed in the city. But with it being so near and dear to people, maybe there's a lot of companies in this city. And if we at least could raise the biggest portion of that, maybe we could come back in front of council and say, hey, we've raised X amount of dollars, we might just need 10,000 or something, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'll be happy to, if we can form a committee and work on that.
Yeah, I mean, I was suggesting kicking it to the Parks Master Planning Task Force, which you're on, and figuring out some of the different options that are available. So that could even be a subcommittee off of the Parks Master Planning Task Force. Gary?
I guess two questions. One, and maybe this is Mr. Gatlin, are there any restrictions around a corporate campaign to build a public building? Is there anything that would prevent us from doing that?
I'm not aware of any. I mean, there's public-private partnerships happen all the time.
Okay.
I think there is another unique challenge here, and it's the ownership of the actual depot park. I think that's always going to be a challenge here with grant money as well as corporate donation.
That was going to be my second question. I don't know if anybody knows offhand how long the lease is on that current property. I'm guessing it's just a couple years, if that.
Yeah, we're actually, I believe that's a month to month right now, because the railroad hasn't updated theirs. With all their new management, that was one thing that they said, that they weren't going to get us the new contract for it, so that they would eventually get it to me, but that's been about a year or so now.
And is there, and I guess if we're talking about potentially spending $150,000 or more, in this space, is there any chance that we can get a longer-term lease?
Well, the issue with the longer-term leases and why I'm okay with the month-to-month right now is it's cheaper. You know, every time we don't renew a lease, it's cheaper because we're using last year's rates. And what we've learned at the Public Works facility is, yes, I convinced them to do a longer-term lease, but with a significant increase.
Yeah, I guess the only concern I have there is if we end up in the situation in 7 years, because we only had a 3-year lease or a month-to-month lease that's been going on, and not a 10 or 20-year lease, that they decide they want to do something with that strip of land, which is track level, and, you know, we're sunk cost at that point.
Well, at that point, aren't we required to move the depot anyways? So
Would that be
our lease states that we have to bring the land back to just the way that we found it. So
But do
we'd
we have
have to pick it up and
Yeah,
move
but
it.
do we have a place that we can move it, or would that be a demo situation? That's right, I'm concerned about, you know, spending $150,000 and then, you know, there's a chance in, you know, a number of years that we'd have to just demo it.
It's been moved before.
Yes. And as I understand, there was grant money for to moving the building and to build the fence.
Mr. Nipper, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, there's so many variables that are, you know, moving around it. I think the first thing we got to decide is, it's something worth doing. I think everybody's in agreement of that. It's just a matter of, you know, we just underestimated cost is really what it boils down to. It could happen anytime, any project, especially something where you're dealing with such older construction, and especially the neglect that it's had. I would like to see, and maybe it's further discussion on, maybe we look at the whole thing, and we pause right now and we look at sectioning it out and putting it in different stages, but maybe look at it, is there another place we could move the depot to? Is there something that we can do? And in the meantime, any of that $67,000 that's needed right now to make sure everything is secure, you know, that nothing's going to be damaged and everything's, you know, perfect. That to me would sound like a pretty reasonable approach, and I would definitely support something like that, because long term, I think there's going to be rise in cost, but I think it's going to level out by the time that we would maybe come to next year's fiscal budget to really think about what to do then. So I don't know how much the costs are going to increase by next year. So I think it would be kind of foolish to just all of a sudden right now say, yeah, let's plop down another $83,000 and maybe even have a supplemental increase from that. I didn't know about the rental and the parcel of land and how that, or the lease, but that's something I think maybe we should consider too, because if we're going to spend $150,000 on something, I wouldn't want to see it uprooted in, let's say, another 2-3 years if the railroad decides to put in some new tracks or something.
Sorry, I'm backtracking a little. I didn't realize we were on a month-to-month lease with the railroad. I thought we had a longer term. I really wouldn't feel comfortable going out asking for donations that if we're just on a month-to-month lease with the railroad. So I'm kind of in agreement to, I don't even think we should spend $67,000 with a month-to-month agreement with the railroad. It's not our property, and that's not even, if we put this much money into it, we're not even being able to enjoy it maybe for 5 years or 10 years. So I just don't feel comfortable with just a short lease, but I think we should put it on hold for now with those circumstances and see if there would be a place to move it. I know there was talk before, maybe Locust Street, that lot, maybe, I don't know if that would even be a possibility, or maybe Silver Lake, somewhere down the future, maybe start looking for places to move that. Just, you know, I didn't know. I don't feel comfortable on railroad property, just a 1 month-to-month lease. Sorry.
Mr. Eckers?
I think we would argue, we have a really good relationship with the railroad, and so it is mutually beneficial when we have these agreements. I know that Public Works building has been there for a very long time. So just for peace of mind for anyone out there who has that grave concern that we're, you know, in 1 month or 60 days notice, they're going to say demo everything. I just don't foresee that happening. I think that it would absolutely be a PR nightmare if they did that. But, you know, I think that, as I understand, we have a good relationship with the railroad, so.
Matt, can you explain a little bit about how The lease is not actually with the railroad, it's with the railroad retirement. Can you explain that a little bit?
I kind of forget because that was a long conversation about a year ago. So I just pulled it up, and the lease did expire June of '21, and that's when my contact said they were swamped and that it would just go to I had actually gave them almost 6-month notice, and they're like, yeah, we're not going to have time to deal with it. So obviously I need to follow up on that. But yeah, so the reason that got brought up is we asked to purchase the Public Works property from them. And they said that's rare, but sometimes they do. So what they do is they have property that Norfolk Southern actually owns, and then there's property that the trust owns. And if the trust owns it, they're not selling it because that's where they get their money. That trust owns it. They actually lease it to Norfolk Southern, who leases it out or uses it, and that's how the trust makes money. So they'll never sell the trust. Public Works ended up, that was trust land, and so is where the depot park is. So both of those are trust lands that they actually wouldn't ever sell. Not saying that they wouldn't. I mean, there's possibilities, I guess, to use it. I think there's more likely that park than Public Works since it's the elevation difference. But from what I've talked to them, I mean, there's zero interest in obviously for them doing anything with it. Yes,
So I'm kind of taking that as they're making more money on it, leasing it, than they would if they used it themselves,
Correct.
which is why they have the trust own it, like you said, because it's more profitable. And that's retirement, I'm guessing, is that trust funds their retirement.
Yeah,
Is
well,
that
I
where
mean,
that came from?
You're right. It's I'm sure over 100 years ago that's been there, but that's just how they keep that trust moving forward. And from what we've seen, and I've got friends that are engineers there. They're not overloading those tracks and the whatever they call the offshoots right here. So I mean, if that was constantly loaded up, I could see them wanting to expand. But with them having the Cincinnati area down there where they do all their moving and stuff, I don't foresee that Erlanger would ever need to be an offshoot for that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm just kind of thinking down the road when, and I don't even know if this is a possibility, but if we were thinking about moving it, and we've relocated our Public Works facility, and we do have, I think, a parcel down there that we actually own, correct? Would that building fit in that same footprint? Is that potentially a possibility that we can move the railroad depot down there? Okay.
Are you talking to the Montgomery Road property?
No, I'm saying we have a parcel that we actually own, right? Isn't the admin building, current admin building?
Oh, okay, I see what
our
you're
own
saying.
land?
Okay.
I was just thinking if it's still near the railroad and if we decided we needed to move it, is that a place that we could move it and it would now be on owned land and never again do we have to worry about lease issues? Thanks.
Any other questions? Mr. Hermes?
Sorry to have one more comment to weigh in on this. I do agree with a lot of what I'm hearing. And one quick comment, I think Mrs. Reckers also kind of addressed this. We've maintained a pretty good relationship with the railroad. And I do remember a few years back, we looked back on, or we did some research on how much of the railroad property that they leased out that they either went back on the lease and said, we're not going to do this anymore, or things like that. And there's like almost zero instances of that happening nationwide. So I mean, we felt comfortable years back even, with continuing this as a lease. The one other thing I'd like to weigh in though is that if we put it off to next year, maybe another possibility would be to revisit the scope of the project as well. I think, if I remember correctly, about half the building, maybe a little bit more than half, is going to be the actual museum part of it, and then the other half was going to be kind of a community space, which I think is great. But I think a lot of the complication and the costs come from that split. And there certainly is enough historical memorabilia and things like that to fill the whole building. you know, if we got rid of the community space idea, that might solve some of the complication with the ramps and the restrooms and things like that, and it might simplify the project to make it more attainable in the next fiscal year.
Wouldn't we still have to have an ADA compliant bathroom because that piece of the museum would be elevated?
Well, if someone can get to the upper level, they don't have to get to the restroom from the upper level. You know what I'm saying? They could get to either level. I mean, part of that complication was we were cutting off half the building so that it could be open to the community, you know, when maybe the museum wouldn't be open.
I think anything's on the table
Yeah.
until it's off. Okay, so from what I'm hearing, we need to revisit scope, potentially phase in, potentially look for grants or capital campaign, but hold off on any budget amendment, hold off on any moving forward with the 67,000 that already is allocated. Does that sound appropriate? I know it's not what we want, but it is what it is. Thank you. I appreciate the participation and the questions. All right, last item on the agenda is the Edge Incentive Ordinance proposed a non-substantive change. Mrs. Randall.
I would like to propose for your consideration some additional language to the Edge Incentive Ordinance. This would be under Section E, which is the factors to consider when determining the amount of incentive to be offered to each applicant. The additional language would add a consideration for any additional investments and incentives associated with the development of the property. This could include any publicly funded infrastructure investments or other incentives such as tax increment finance districts or industrial revenue bonds. This came up in conversations. We were talking about the potential for offering incentives to businesses located in the Commerce Park, which has other incentives already layered into that package. So just to have that as a consideration. Does anybody have questions, concerns? If not, we will add this to the language for the second reading. Okay, thank you.
All right, that concludes tonight's agenda. Do I entertain a motion that, Mr. Nipper?
Yes, Mayor, I'd like to file a motion for the formation of a new task force, predominantly around emergency preparation for the city in the event of like a utility, communication, or energy long-term outage. We probably have something in already, but I'd like to review it and update it.
I'd second that.
Okay, so we have a motion to create the Emergency Preparation Task Force. Is that the name that you want? Okay, we have a second. All in favor say aye. Opposed? All right, so we'll go ahead and create that. I'm assuming that you want to chair that and then develop your team from there? Okay. All right. Mr. Meyer, did I see your hand up? Okay, so do you still want to? Okay, all right. Mr. Hermes, second. All in favor say aye. Opposed? All right, have a good